Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part four as we look at the Gospel of Mark, and we should finish up the Gospel of Mark here. But we left off with the questions regarding the prisoner exchange, and I noticed that I made a grammatical error with, Josephus and Tacitus. I had by there, by they say, but it was supposed to be but they say nothing about the prisoner exchange. That's a minor issue. Anyway, fix that. But I mentioned with the questions regarding the prisoner exchange, and for myself on the issue, I'm pretty indifferent towards it. I mean, whether it happened or not doesn't really affect me either way. It is part of the Christian liturgy during Holy Week, but outside of that, it's not a major thing that Christians focus on. But all four gospels do contain it. So with me, it can be argued either way, but I'm really indifferent towards it. I mean, whether it happened or not wouldn't really change anything overall. Certainly from a faith perspective, it wouldn't change anything. But look here, with Jesus being condemned to die, in the prisoner exchange, the crowd in Jerusalem condemns Jesus to die. They choose Barabbas over him. He is sentenced to death by crucifixion and he's mocked by the Roman soldiers. This is essentially where they dress Jesus as a king and mock him, refer to him as the king of the Jews. I think of how in the miniseries Jesus of Nazareth that came out in the late 1970s, um, there's a scene in there with the Roman soldiers where they mock Jesus, and one of them says how Tiberius must be getting worried. Tiberius, of course, referring to the Roman emperor. But this is where, again, the Roman soldiers they dress Jesus as a king and make fun of him. Well, why was Jesus crucified? I mean, what did he do or say that would warrant the Jewish and the Roman authorities to have him executed? I touched on this earlier with Jesus' trial before the Sanhedrin and, of course, before Caiaphas, the high priest of Judaism at the time. But, what exactly did he say or do? I mean, calling himself the Messiah, that certainly would not have done it. Um, Calling himself the Son of God, that certainly would not have done it because we could all say that we're the sons and daughters of God, although Jesus perhaps uses that term in a way that Jewish people might find to be very arrogant. Now, calling himself God incarnate, that would certainly, you know, do it from a Jewish perspective, although in this case it was the Romans that actually signed his death warrant. The Jewish people didn't have the authority to have him executed, the Romans did. That certainly would have done it, but it's not actually clear if Jesus, referred to himself as that. It's a question, within historically speaking Christian theology. We'll get to that a little bit later. And not all of Jesus's early followers had that view about him. Jesus referring to himself as the king of the Jews, that could certainly cause it from a Roman perspective. But, during the questioning, from Pilate, when he asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus's response is, "You say so." That's not a declaring that I am. That's, you say that about me. I'm not saying that about myself. That's what you say. So, if anything, to take a moderate view, I would say that both Roman and Jewish authorities just saw Jesus as a troublemaker and wanted him out of the way. But then we have the death and his resurrection. Upon Jesus' death by crucifixion, the veil in the temple was torn in two. So when Jesus dies on the cross, the veil in the temple, which divided, set apart the Holy of Holies, it's torn in two. And this is found in the Gospel of Mark and in Matthew and in Luke. It's absent in the Gospel of John. Um, we don't have any outside evidence of the veil in the temple being torn in two. If anything did actually happen, um, the Jewish people, excuse me, the Jewish religious authorities apparently didn't think that it was important enough to comment on. At best, I would say that a lot of this is probably Mark taking literary license, essentially, trying to state how the Jewish priesthood has ended and now the Christian priesthood has begun, or to think of it another way, kind of echoing the author of the letter to the Hebrews, that the Christian priesthood is superior to the Jewish. Well, once the body of Jesus was taken down from the cross, it was placed in a tomb. Now, within the Jewish tradition, a body is buried within 24 hours after death. Now, obviously, that can't happen completely in contemporary times, but traditionally speaking, a body is to be buried within a day after death. Well, Jesus being executed by crucifixion has a little bit more of some points here to make, and it comes from a passage in the Torah in Deuteronomy that I'm going to read from here. When someone is convicted of a crime punishable by death and is executed, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse must not remain all night upon the tree. You shall bury him that same day, for anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. You must not defile the land that the Lord your God is giving you for possession. So basically, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. In this case, we're referring to a cross, a tree. And so it was important to get Jesus's body down and bury him quickly. And it's not mentioned in the Gospel of Mark. In fact, it's not mentioned in, I don't know if it's mentioned in Luke. I'll have to check with that. I don't think it is. But in John's Gospel, it is mentioned about how um, that, the scene, break the other prisoners with Jesus, break their legs because that will hasten death because the Sabbath was coming. And so, it was important to get the bodies, get them off the cross and get them buried before the Sabbath, because when the Sabbath starts, you can't do any work. And breaking their legs would hasten the death. But in the case with Jesus, he's described as being already dead. Well, on the beginning of the first day of the week, this would be Sunday, Jesus' body was found to be missing from the tomb, and a young man inside the tomb informed those who had come to anoint Jesus' body that he had been resurrected. So the women who came to anoint Jesus' body, they couldn't do so, the day following, because that was all of the Sabbath. And anointing his body would be considered working on the Sabbath and thus breaking it. So they had to wait until the next day, which would be Sunday in our calendar. And that's when they found the body missing. and informed by individuals there in the tomb, a young man, that Jesus had been resurrected and they are to go to Galilee. And then you have the extended ending of Mark. From our earliest accounts that we have, the earliest manuscripts we have of the Gospel of Mark, it ends with an empty tomb. However, a copyist, producing the Gospel of Mark, thought essentially that this was a horrible ending and that he could make it better, he or she. So that's where you have Jesus appear, the resurrected Jesus appears before his disciples and states how you'll be able to pick up serpents and nothing will be able to harm you, etc., etc. Um, I mentioned, and I'll mention it now, it doesn't change the canonical status of that particular passage because if, a community or an individual, finds something to be canonical or divinely inspired, it doesn't really matter who wrote it or when it was written. It wouldn't change that fact. But it's not part of the earliest manuscript that we have of the Gospel of Mark. So, well, in any case, that's all that we have for the Gospel of Mark. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Till then, take care.